Kate's supervisor, and I can introduce her. But great to see everybody. Thanks for the invitation and for the support of Kate's studies. Kate's doing some great work around functional neurological disorder illness models, and can give an update on her project. So, and I'll be here to answer any questions or clarifications if required.
Okay, thanks very much. Cate.
Let me get my slide up.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So I'm just going to set the timer because I know we're quite short on time. So thanks very much. So I'm Cate Bailey. I'm a psychiatrist. I work in East London clinically, and I'm doing a part-time MD with all of these kind of wonderful collaborators below, not least of which MHR UK. So I'm studying at King's, but recruiting patients from St George's and South West London, and also have some support from the Psychiatry Research Trust and FND Hope. And these are kind of collaborators and supervisors as well. So I'll give you a bit of an update on kind of where I'm at. So my study looks at the experiences, understanding and conceptual models in people with FND, and it's a mixed methods study. So just to explain a little bit about FND, because it may not be something that people have heard of, even though it's a very, very common disorder. So it happens when neurological symptoms are caused by how the nervous system is functioning rather than damage to the structure, like in Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis. But it can present with lots of different neurological symptoms, things like seizures, tremors, paralysis, numbness, cognitive problems. And it's a very, very common presentation in neurology clinics. But it has been and continues to be highly stigmatized. And until recent years, there has been kind of fairly limited clinical or sort of neuroscientific interest. And so you may have heard of kind of previous names for it, things like hysteria, psychogenic, conversion disorder. So these are labels that have been kind of very sort of stigmatized over the years. And that's kind of translated through to how patients experience their illnesses. So people often feel that their seizures or their weakness are very mysterious, that they're going to be permanent. And FND Hope have done a study looking at the experiences of people with healthcare professionals and found that often they experience quite negative interactions as well. So there's a lot to think about in terms of how we might improve the experience of people with FND, because they also have kind of very high rates of kind of morbidity and chronicity. So these are very serious disorders that need our attention. So my study has lots of different parts. I'm going to focus today on talking to you about a systematic review that we're working on at the moment. But just to provide an update, so we're doing quantitative study and have kind of exceeded recruitment for that, which is based around an education session run at St George's, looking at whether a kind of particular way of explaining the disorder, a multidisciplinary education session might improve people's experiences. We're doing a qualitative study around that. And we're also doing a more in-depth look through focus groups, which we're kind of halfway through recruiting for. I should say as well that I've had a 6-month break this year as well because of clinical work. So thanks as always to MHR UK for being very patient with me and for my supervisors as well. I am actually at a point where I've got a better work balance now with my clinical role and academic work. So just looking now at the systematic review, so we were wanting to look at the experiences of people living with motor or sensory FND. And when I say that, I'm talking about symptoms that might affect the motor function, so things like weakness, paralysis, that might include sort of things like facial paralysis or one limb being paralyzed, abnormal movements like tremors or dystonia, so stiffness in a limb, as well as sensory type disorders, so problems with pins and needles, numbness, as well as kind of speech or balance. We were hoping to kind of look at what are the experiences of this group and how might we better meet their needs. So we looked at studies that use qualitative methodologies. We wanted to capture people's experiences in their own words. And we looked from the year 2000 onwards because that's when a kind of more modern concept of FND has been kind of studied. We had a comprehensive search strategy, which I won't go into too much detail about, with quality assessment, and my main kind of collaborator, Arnis, and I extracted data and line by line coded all of the discussion and results sections using in vivo generated descriptive codes, then descriptive themes, and then analytic themes. And I'll be presenting today some of the kind of the outline that we've come to with our analytic themes, but it's still a work in progress, although we're hoping to write up and publish in the next couple of months. So we ended up with a lot of papers, and 11 in total meeting the criteria. Moderate to high quality overall, with a total number of people's views of 150 with different types of FND, including sort of the ones that I've described, as well as kind of drop attacks, which is a sort of subtype of FND where people kind of lose tone and fall down, as well as a newly kind of understood type of FND, which relates to dizziness, and people experience kind of unsteadiness and vertigo type symptoms. The papers often didn't describe ethnicity, but when they did, it was a largely white group, and mostly we limited to English language, but so many studies from the UK and the other countries listed there, with a variety of different qualitative methodologies. So as I said, this is still a work in progress, and we're trying to find a way to visually represent where we've got to in sort of how this might kind of fit together. But one of the kind of main underpinning sort of central themes was this kind of uncertainty about what FND is as a kind of core concept that people really wrestle with. And that then also leads into these kind of quite still dualistic ideas about mind and body, and this big tension between sort of clinicians tending to kind of push psychological stress and trauma as a model, and patients kind of pushing back against that and sort of saying, you know, it's a physical illness, when really actually it's at the interface. It's the disorder that is very much at the interface of the mind and the body, or the embodied mind. So I'll dig into some of these just briefly. So there was a long journey to diagnosis for all of the participants. Some of them still hadn't received a diagnosis of FND, but many had. And they noticed that the way that this was framed was often sort of clinicians would describe kind of what it wasn't rather than what it was, or probable, possible, or telling people that there was kind of nothing wrong. Having said that, when people did get a proper FND diagnosis, there was a lot of kind of validation, relief, understanding, and kind of, you know, that resonated with people. This linked very much to kind of relationships with healthcare. So there were a lot of negative experiences where people felt kind of blamed and shamed for their condition, dismissed or told that it was all in their head. Having said that, again, participants did identify kind of positive interactions where even if clinicians kind of hadn't heard of FND or weren't quite sure, they still believed there was something wrong and they were willing to kind of go and look it up. So that kind of humility was valued. Loss of power and control was kind of both in the experience of the symptoms themselves, so kind of having a limb that you can't control, you can't will it to stop, as well as this kind of metaphoric kind of loss of control of life and kind of future direction, and this uncertainty about what would happen and would this ever get better. Again, not having a clear understanding of what this was led to this kind of question of who or what to blame for the symptoms. So is it my brain? Is it my nervous system? Is it my body? Is it my mind? Is it trauma? And then kind of that often for many participants kind of came back around to a kind of blaming of the self because no other kind of, explanation was offered. And the last theme was kind of visible disability and invisible illness. And that was kind of manifest through this kind of people often having quite unusual movements or a kind of obvious facial paralysis or symptoms that were very obvious but were very, very hard to explain. And so people had lots of different ways of trying to kind of work around this in terms of navigating employers and family and trying to kind of navigate this uneasy kind of relationship with the sick role in an illness that kind of isn't validated or very well understood. And there was a lot of people saying, I wish I could just have a brain tumor. I wish I could have something that people just understood. So there's a huge kind of desperation to be heard and understood. So it has highlighted the kind of vital importance of thinking about explanatory models, which is this culturally determined complex process of making sense of an illness and ascribing meaning and expectations around recovery. And that, you know, FND is a classic kind of example of how someone might feel about their own illness is influenced by society and kind of stigma and interactions, but that there is a potential for moderating that through kind of explanations and interactions. As I said, sort of diagnostic delays, people lived with their symptoms for many years and were given many wrong diagnoses before they finally got the right one. Patients noted this kind of unusual way of giving a diagnosis. So it tended to be a process of kind of saying, well, it's not this and it's not this. So that's it. Whereas, you know, that obviously doesn't build a huge amount of trust when people are still kind of having these symptoms. So people want to hear what it is, not what it's not. And there were lots of tensions around kind of where symptoms came from and kind of attributions. And I guess we've been lucky to read a recent systematic review which looks at healthcare professionals' experiences. And a central theme of that was also uncertainty, which led to this, what they talk about, a vicious cycle, where people kind of avoided having interactions with people with FND, passed the buck, felt they lacked confidence, didn't understand what it was, and so on. And so obviously this also has a profound effect on patient experiences. So I guess one of the things that's been identified is a huge gap in education for healthcare professionals about FND, and that trickles down to the experiences of patients. And what we're hoping to look at with the rest of this study is kind of perhaps what does a virtuous rather than a vicious cycle look like? What is it like to go to an education session where people give you a very robust explanation of what's going on? Does that kind of improve hope and kind of belief in treatability? And you know, certainly one of the other things is kind of co-produced research and education is vital. And there are some things happening now. There's been a recent kind of optimum clinical pathway that's been a huge collaboration that's been published. So there is, you know, it's gaining awareness and things are starting to improve. So these are the included studies. And then again, just thanks very much to my collaborators.
Thank